Morning and happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. That's one of the big days for church going. For some reason, people find it to be important. And we will dive in and explore why, just a little bit. 'Cause there's something really special that happened with Jesus' ministry. Before then, he was born Jewish, and Judaism was a turning point. That was the first monotheistic religion. There was just one God. There was one God, and it was all about law. There were a set of rules, and if you obeyed the rules, then you could live a happy and joyous life. Anybody know how many mitzvahs there are? 613. 10 of them are commandments. 613. And Jesus knew all of those. He learned all of that. But what he came teaching was that it's all about love. Jesus said that love is the answer. Law points the way, but love is the answer. And in fact, that's the balance point for religious science, for New Thought, where we are. We are at a balance point between love and law. The law makes everything possible, and it's through love. The way that works in real life is that we acknowledge, as we do in our practical prayers, our spiritual mind treatments, that there is one power. That is that divine nature, that God essence, that infinite intelligence that created everything. So we can use a biblical story from Scripture if we want to, or we can go to science and look at the Big Bang, because before there was all of this, there was just that one. Whether it was God or the singularity that expanded into the universe, there was one. So we can all trace our lineage back to that one. We are all part of that one. And as it expands, with the natural laws of the universe, with the mitzvahs, there's that possibility for us to use that same power to repeat that creative process again and again and again. That's love. That sharing of self is love itself. So on Easter, we get a chance to revisit that, because Jesus came teaching about love. Now, Easter is a big deal. Resurrection Day, I believe that it's being called now by title rather than just Easter. I don't know if that's politically correct or where that came from. And Jesus taught about everlasting life. But he didn't teach about everlasting life by saying, hey, watch this. He was teaching about love. He was teaching about turning the other cheek. He was teaching about accepting the lepers and prostitutes and everybody else and loving them, loving everybody instead of judging everybody. And then there was that crucifixion experience, which I got to figure was relatively unpleasant. Can't imagine anybody wanting to go through that. And in fact, there are some stories of Jesus on the cross really not wanting to be there either. But after that, he demonstrated everlasting life by coming back. And that's actually something that I've been grappling with a little bit. We're teaching our practitioner students, and one of the questions is about everlasting life. And my good friend Joanna Carmichael, her dog Hank, who's been her best friend forever, had been sick for the longest time. And so Hank got put down yesterday, and we were able to visit with Joanna both before and afterwards. And so I got up close and personal with everlasting life, because the body's not there anymore. And in so many cases, I mean, 7 billion people on the planet, we all have an expiration date. We don't necessarily know what it is, but if you go 200 years in the future, we will all have found it. Even the ones who are just on the way in now, basically, that's the window that we have. So the question is, what about this everlasting life? And the metaphor is a light bulb. Anybody ever have a light bulb? You turn the light on, fills up the room, and then suddenly you turn it on and it doesn't work anymore? Nothing happened to the principle. The light still exists. It's just not coming through that bulb anymore. To think that something ended because that bulb is no longer in service takes away all of the power, all of the potential for that light to shine in all sorts of different ways. So Jesus didn't actually come talking and teaching everlasting life. He demonstrated it at the end and made such a big impression that that's the cornerstone of his ministry at this point. But as I like to say, in all scriptural stories, you can find things that are metaphorical, historical, and metaphysical. And there's just no end to the hilarity that ensues when we read something metaphorical or metaphysical and think that it was historical and say, no, that's what actually happened. Or if we see something historical and we try to read something else into it. But since today is about Metaphysical Easter, we're going to talk about that resurrection process. And the one thing, as we're somewhere over the rainbow, as Emily was singing that song, the one thing that the rainbow requires is rain. You need to have a storm before you can have a rainbow. And in the same way, in order to have a resurrection, you need to have a crucifixion. So in some cases, it's quite dramatic, and it's as awe-inspiring as the crucifixion story about Jesus. But those things repeat themselves in our lives over and over and over again. I was thinking about crucifixion, resurrection stories in my own life, and the challenge that I had was narrowing it down to just a handful to talk about. And so I'll tell one of mine, and maybe that will make somebody else be inspired, and maybe you want to share one of yours. So when I was a teenager, I was living in the New York area, and my favorite radio station was WNBC. I loved that station. It was awesome. Listened to it whenever I got a chance to. Imus was doing the morning show. And so it was just, that was cool. When I got my driver's license, I would listen to that. That was all we had was an AM radio in the car. And we were in Vermont for the Christmas to New Year's week. And my brother was doing his first year at Dartmouth. And so I volunteered to drive him back over to college on New Year's Eve or whenever it was. So I drove over and hung around with him and his friends. And as I was leaving, it started to snow a little bit. And then it snowed more and more and more. And it turned into a full-fledged blizzard in what should have been about an hour and a half for me to get back to where we were staying in Vermont. And I was a whiteout. It was probably 10 o'clock at night at this point, and I had never driven on these roads before. They looked completely different than they did when I was on the way out there. And I was feeling a little bit stressed, but because of the way AM radio works, it's like got a huge skip signal. And I was able to tune in WNBC, and I heard the guy who was doing the night show there, and that was like calming because that was really familiar. Okay, there's an anchor point here. Alan Beebe was doing the nighttime show, he was talking to me, he was playing the music that I liked. It was all okay. And I went to college, I went to NYU, I was in broadcasting, and in the summer between my junior and senior year, I got a chance to work at WNBC. They were union engineers, and they needed somebody to fill in while, their 17 engineers went on vacation. So I got to go in and run the board for Alan Beebe and for Don Imus, and to be working at 30 Rock. And I was still in college. I was like 20. This was awesome. And the next year, it's possible that I would go back and do that again. But there was a kerfuffle. Things didn't work out. There was a problem. So I didn't get to go back. And that idea had its first crucifixion experience. And I stayed in the radio business, and a few years later, I did a morning show here in Philadelphia. It's actually what I moved here for. And 2 years later, after that show ended, the guy who did the morning show here got hired at WNBC to do the afternoon show there. And I went up and I did the audition with him. He got the job, but they didn't hire me because I'd already been there as an engineer and I couldn't come back as air talent. That was a crucifixion experience. That was heart-wrenching. That was terrible. And it wasn't the end. Because in hindsight, if either of those two things had happened, if I had gone and been an engineer at NBC coming out of college, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I'm on a different path now. I've had 9 different careers, and friends of mine who were working there then are still working there now. And the same thing in the radio business. I might have anchored myself into the radio business, but I opened up to all sorts of different possibilities. And through a series of events that actually was triggered by that, I got into the sort of work on myself that has led me into the ministry. So what was a crucifixion experience, the death of something that was really dear to me, all of that heartbreaking, wrenching experience actually turned out to be something okay. Now, is there anybody here who can think of one of those crucifixion, resurrection experiences in your own life? Yeah, there are a bunch of them. Anybody want to talk about it now? You get a chance to do this later, and you can do a wisdom share if you want, but if somebody wants to jump in now, you're welcome to. Michelle.
I won't keep it too long, but I, in the 70s, had a friend that I liked, I thought more than a friend. We're like soulmates. And given our histories and stuff, it ended up, he ended up living in New York, and I was going to move up from Philadelphia, and I did, but I was going to move up a month before that. He told me that he was homosexual, because gay really wasn't a word yet. I mean, it was a word, but it wasn't. And it rocked my world, because I was a very good Catholic girl, sexuality-wise, everything-wise, and if you played by the rules, you were supposed to get the reward, And this is what I thought, but I had gone to nursing school, left social work, going to nursing school, and I'd seen life and death, and I knew, I had an inkling, I was ready. But I moved to New York anyway, and I was devastated by this, because it rocked my world, and it felt crucified and whatever. That was 1978. Life went on to wonderful things. By going to New York, I started exploring out of my tribe of Roman Catholic Irish to Theosophy, to Buddhist, to eventually meeting my husband and coming here in New Thought. But we're still friends, and when his mother died, and I was in the little town in Pittsburgh with his partner and myself, driving around the town, and I thought, I'd driven around this town as his girlfriend to his family, and I thought to myself, wow, if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be who I was. If we had, so much has happened because of that. And yet the love that he and I still have today, and the friendship, because that is, as Jesus taught, this love that's all there is. I could have been angry and let it go, but I didn't. So our path is still a loving friendship. Brahm got used to him, right? And loved him, I think. And his partner, and Michael and I and Ron that we're family. So I could have taken it an angry route, I could have done other things, but I have on so many other levels expanded that I really think would have been a different path, but would have been a very, very different path.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm grateful.
Yeah. So there's the secret. Whatever it is, whatever crap has surfaced in your life up until now has served the purpose of bringing you to this moment, to this awareness, to this opportunity to choose your next step. Just because it's always happened that way doesn't mean it's going to happen that way again. That's the good news and the bad news. We can't necessarily count on things being the same way that they've always been. Joanna can't count on her dog being there because things happen. And what this teaching tells us is we get to choose. We get to be intentional. We get to use that creative power to create our lives, to create our next step the way that we want to. So whenever you look over your shoulder at the twisted, circuitous, completely unpredictable path that has brought you to this moment, remember that each step has been the step of God, whether it's the one that you would have chosen consciously or not. It has to be, right? That's all there is. There's only God. That's what we start the prayers with. There's only God, which means that tortuous path is God itself, bringing me to whatever. And I'm free to choose whatever it is that's going to be coming next. And of course, I couldn't do one of these talks without referencing Emma Curtis Hopkins, who sums it up in a different way, and you guys can feel free to stand and stomp if you want to. Emma taught us, this too is good, this too is God, this too is for me now, and I demand to see the blessing in it. Because there is a blessing in it. Because there has to be a blessing in it. Because a blessing means that there's a gift from God, and since there's only God, of course there's a gift from God in it. Loop right back upon itself. I love that it's April Fool's Day and Easter the same day, just having wonderful fun with that. Yes? No?
Yes.
So, mixing all of the metaphors together, there's Reverend Dave shaking his head. I'm not going to do that? Oh my goodness. Easter and April Fool's Day on the same day. It means when the stone is rolled back, Jesus comes out. If he sees the shadow, there's going to be 6 more weeks of April Fools. There's the invitation for each of us. It would be sacrilegious, except it's all God, right? What's the gift? That's both the challenge and the invitation. To be able to look at whatever that situation is, whatever that path is, the parts that don't seem like they're fun, don't seem like what we're looking for, and find the gift in it. When I was going through a particularly difficult challenge, my friend, Reverend Ian Taylor, told me that the reason that I was being given this challenge was because I was strong enough to carry it. And I was trying to think of a spiritual way to tell him off. But it's true. It's true. That which is challenging us is also that which is giving us the opportunity to grow. Came in really early this morning with my daughter. We did yoga in this newly cleaned great room, which, by the way, was pleasant. Because the place where I usually do yoga on Sunday mornings is closed because it's Easter. So we were able to spend some time together and find a different avenue for the activity that we both enjoy. And that whole time, there's some challenging moves. Standing there at the top of a push-up, not standing. Lying there, plank pose for 3 or 4 minutes. It's a challenge. And I can still feel it in my muscles now. And the way that it works in our muscles, when we lift weights, our muscles get stronger. It's not that lifting weights is pleasant, okay? Some people like lifting weights because they know what it's going to do for them later, but the actual act of lifting weights, it's like lifting weights. So there's always that invitation. And because we are creations of that divine intelligence, because we are expressions of that infinite love, because we are using the same capabilities that the infinite used to create the universe, to create our lives, we get to choose. In the beginning there was darkness and void, and God said, "Let there be light." And the invitation for you on Easter, April Fool's Sunday, is to say, let there be whatever the good is that we're claiming. Take a deep breath in. Deep breath out. You get to relax into the truth of the divinity that you are. And choose well. Choose love. Because you deserve it. So it is.